So again, yesterday we were just going over different correlations. So again, just to remind you, there are 4 things that you're correlating. I'm not going to go over them. I'll just mention what the 4 correlations are. There are 4 things. Each has 5 components. There are the 5 parts of the Shem Havaya. That's Kutzo Shel Yud, Yud Kei Vav Kei. There are 5 worlds. Adam Kadmain, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, going from higher to lower. There are 5 parts of our neshamas, using neshama generically. That's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. And the Sfiros themselves are divided into 5 groups. We have Keser, Chochmah, Bina. Right, those are 3. Then we have 6. The 6 lower Sfiros, which are called Zeir Anpin. So it's Keser, Chochmah, Bina, Zeir Anpin, and Malchus. That's 5, right? 5. So you see, I'm not going to go over it again, but you see the idea that each of these correlate to each other. The Shem Havaya, the Chalakim of the Neshama, the world, and the Sfiros. Break up into 5 groups, and you try to draw some linear comparison between all of them. Obviously, to go into this, I mean, basically, the Kisvei Arizal, which are thousands of pages, are developing all of these correlations. That's exactly what it's about. But Hayaytzei Midvarenu, the thing that emerges is the infinite importance of what a human being does, what a Jew does. In our Avodah, we are linking to worlds, we are linking to aspects of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, doing mitzvahs and doing averos are not just transactional benefits or deficits. Not simply, I get a good deal or I get a bad deal. But rather, one is affecting the spiritual structure of the entire universe. And if you walk away with only that one idea, that just shows you the infinite importance of the avodah that a person does. And as I said a number of times already, other people have said, particularly during this time of tzara, it's very important that we recognize the importance of our Torah learning, of our prayer. Not to put guilt trips on people, but it could, basically, the learning we do on any given day might save a life in Gaza. We just don't see the cause and effect. And God forbid, a hisrashlos in our learning and avodah could result in somebody dying in Gaza. That's how it is. Everything is connected in that way. And as a result, that's a tremendous, number one, a source of chizuk, that no person could feel they're insignificant. But number 2, it's a tremendous source of responsibility, a tremendous source of achrayus. Because once you know that Hashem has given you this power, at that point there becomes an achrayus, a responsibility to use the power in a way that will be makadesh Hashem and bring bracha into the world in various ways. And if a person believes in Torah and mitzvahs, but doesn't believe in the power of Torah and mitzvahs to change the world, they are actually an apikoros. The Gemara has, in Sanhedrin, the Gemara has a lot of definitions of an apikoros. The standard definition is a person who doesn't believe the ikrei amuna in one way or the other. But there's another definition the Gemara says, that what is an apikoros? A person who says, Mai ahani lan rabbanan. What benefit do the Rabbanan bring to the world? L'ditul masni, they learn for themselves. They do mitzvahs for themselves. What is the attitude? This is not referring to an apikoros who doesn't believe in the Torah. He believes in the Torah, believes in the mitzvahs. But basically has the attitude, the people who do mitzvahs get rewarded and the people who do averos get punished. So when the Chachamim learn Torah, they're helping themselves, they're not helping us. That's called apikoros. That's called kfira. If you deny the power of Torah and mitzvahs to bring bracha into the world, that is a form of apikoros. Okay. And again, in a sense, the whole Talmud Devorah is basically saying that the way I behave determines the shefa of bracha that comes into the world. So the first 2 prakim were about the midah of keser. And now we move into the Midah of Chochmah. And here, the chapters are both shorter and a little more Kabbalistic at the same time. In other words, the detail is, there's less detail, but sometimes there's more Kabbalistic references. But here, the Talmud Devorah enumerates a number of ways. Remember, we're going with what I call the double emulation theory, or the double imitation theory. The concept is we imitate God, and therefore God imitates us. By us imitating God's ways, we activate those ways. In other words, until we act, those ways exist as potentials within divinity that have not yet been activated. We imitate those potentialities. Those potentialities become activated, right? That's called the double, well, just my made-up name, the double emulation theory, or the double imitation theory, and the whole Talmud Devorah is based on that double. You imitate God, God imitates you. So we have to imitate the attribute of Chochmah. So first, the Talmud Devorah mentions, HaChochmah ha'elyaina, the upper Chochmah of that Sphira, Perusa al kol hanimtsoim kulam, encompasses, it is spread across the totality of creation. And he quotes a pasuk that should be very familiar to you because you say it every day. Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem. How abundant, right at the beginning in the Berachos Kriya Shema. How abundant are your creations, Hashem? Kulam bechachma asisa. All of them were made through Chochmah. Now, a non-Kabbalist would just say, God's creations are filled with wisdom, etc. But this is referring very specifically that Chochmah, because remember, Chochmah is Keser is Ratzon. Keser is the desire to create. Chochmah is the visualization of the creation. Bina is fleshing out the details. So all creation within God's brain, so to speak, is first visualized as a finished product in Chochmah. Right? So Chochmah is kolel, everything that will be created. Therefore, Chochmah covers everything. So what's my emulation? Kach roi liadam shetiya chochmaso mitsuya bakol. The same way that God's divine wisdom is in every single creation, kulam b'chachma asisa, we must use our wisdom to be available for everybody. Meaning, melamed lahoil livnei adam, that you want to teach beneficial truths, l'chol echad v'yachad, to every individual you can reach, kefi kocho. Now, kefi kocho is interesting because it's actually an ambiguous phrase. Chochmah means you make your wisdom available to everybody according to his strength. Now, who is the his? Does that mean according to your strength? Meaning I got to try to teach up to the extent of my ability? Or there's another subtlety which the Ramak will actually say beferish. You have to teach according to the strength of the recipient. See, this is very, very important. And the Ramak will in fact say this beferish later on, that when a person is a teacher, and again, a teacher doesn't have to mean an official Rebbe, whether it's a Rebbe, whether it's a parent, whether it's you're learning with a weaker bacher or a bacher with less experience. Part of being a teacher is to know how to measure out the amount that the person is able to receive. There may be ideas that are beyond them at this given point in time. There may be ideas that religiously or spiritually they would not yet be ready to accept. So the same way that you can't put a gallon into a container that only contains a quart. So with Torah knowledge as well, part of what a Rebbe or a parent has to do is to be mitzamtzem, to hold things back. Because indeed, that's the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu would put into the universe all of his spiritual essence, the universe could not exist at all. The whole idea of Tzimtzum, I don't want to get into Tzimtzum because Tzimtzum seems to give people nervous breakdowns. I'm not sure why. So I'm not going to talk about it a lot. But the whole idea that the initial creation was an act of contraction. God contracted, tells you something about the art of creation. That creation also means to hold back. To hold back. If someone overwhelms you with so many masses of knowledge that are beyond your capacity to receive, then you wind up, it's like, again, trying to put a gallon of water into a cup that only contains a pint or a quart. Everything's going to spill out, including the stuff that, including the quart, everything spills, right? So, kfi kocho has a double meaning. I should teach according to my koach, and I should teach according to your koach, meaning the recipient's koach as well. So that's the first idea, the idea that one must be willing to share, one must be willing to give. And it's so interesting, let's go back to a sefer that was written a few hundred years after the Torah Devorah, but deals with a lot of the same themes, Nefesh HaChaim. Nefesh HaChaim was written by Rav Chaim of Volozhin, and Nefesh HaChaim is a book in 4 chapters. They're called Sha'arim, and in the yeshiva world, for some reason, the only one that people ever really learn in Nefesh HaChaim is Shar Dalet, which is more or less the mission statement of the Litvish Yeshiva, in which in more than 30 prakim within the Shar, he talks about the importance of Talmud Torah. So everything about Talmud Torah, learning. This is it. And the entire emphasis in the yeshiva world on the absolute importance of Talmud Torah. I mean, Nefesh HaChaim is not the first one, obviously. I mean, he bases it on Chazal and Zohar, but this is the most definitive formulation about learning, and especially Gemara learning and the like. Nefesh HaChaim, you can call that the mission statement. Now, the truth is, there are other parts of Nefesh HaChaim besides Shar Dalet. There is Shar Aleph, which talks about the importance of mitzvos. There's Shar Beis, that talks about tefillah. There is Shar Gimel, that talks about Tzimtzum. Skip that one. And then there actually is an intermediate Shar between Gimel and Dalet that's unnumbered for some reason. That is kind of a summary of the book. Actually, for some reason, it never got a number. So there are actually 5 chapters in Nefesh HaChaim, but 4 of them are numbered, and then there's something in the middle. But so if anybody were to say, like, what is the Nefesh HaChaim about? So people would often say, it's about the importance of Torah learning, and it certainly is, but that's not the only thing it talks about. But what's interesting is, the Hakdama of the Nefesh HaChaim was written by his son, Rav Yitzchak Volozhin, who happened to be the Nitziv's father-in-law. But Rav Yitzchak of Volozhin, called Rav Itzel of Volozhiner, was the successor. When Rav Chaim Volozhiner died, Rav Yitzchak became the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. When he died, that's when the Nitziv became the Rosh Yeshiva, and the like. Now, in fact, there's a whole story, to digress for a moment. They say that Rav Yitzchak of Volozhin was a very broad-minded person. Number one, there's a rumor that he had Sifrei Chasidus in his library. Rumor. There's even a shmua that he wanted to go to medical school as a younger person. And the story goes that Rav Chaim Volozhiner started the whole yeshiva so his son wouldn't go to medical school. He said, if the only thing I accomplished was I got my son not to go to medical school, that would have been Dayenu. So he was what you call in Yiddish a breiter mensch, a person who was very broad and the like. So in the Hakdama to Nefesh HaChaim, he actually says something that his father told him constantly. He says, a person was not created for himself. A person was created to give to others. The tachlis of our bria is to be meitiv. And once again, this makes perfect sense in light of the Derech Hashem from the Arizal, that Hashem created the world as an act of bestowing his goodness upon us, and my job is to emulate Hashem. So how do I emulate Hashem? By giving of my goodness. So you might think there seems to be a contradiction in the book. Is my tachlis to learn Torah? Or is my tachlis to give to others? And you might look at them as two different goals. The emes is, the Ramak is telling you how you reconcile it. Your job is to give to others, but it should be, of course there's chesed and tzedakah, but its primary way that you give to others is to try to be a mashpia of the Chochmah of Torah, the Chochmah of Midos. Right, so that's not, in other words, it's not a contradiction. Using your Chochmah to benefit others. And in fact, Rav Chaim Volozhiner has a commentary on Pirkei Avos called Ruach Chaim, right? So he has Nefesh HaChaim, which is a general sefer, and then Ruach Chaim, which is on Pirkei Avos. Sometimes they're printed together because they're mashlim each other. So in the Ruach Chaim, there's a famous Mishnah that says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, Im lamadata Torah harbe. If you have learnt a lot of Torah, al tachzik taiva liyatzmacha ki lechach neitzarta. Do not. So again, the question is how you translate these words. The standard translation, the Art Scroll translation, of al tachzik taiva liyatzmacha means don't congratulate yourself. Meaning you learned a lot of Torah, don't be so proud of yourself. Ki lechach neitzarta. That's your job. That's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. So what are you supposed to be, a balgaiva? That you did, right? Just like sometime, you can argue with this. Let's assume you had a bacher who was never going to Minyan. And he finally decided he would go to Minyan. And he goes to the Rebbe afterwards and says, Rebbe, I came to Minyan today. Now, Lamaisa, I think the Rebbe should compliment him. I actually think that is the proper thing. But sometimes a Rebbe will say, what do you want? I should congratulate you for doing what, a normal person is supposed to do? What do you want? Okay, that's kind of a tough love, I'm masking. But essentially, Pirkei Avos is kind of saying that. Give yourself credit for learning. Hey, that's your job, right? So that's the simple taich of al tachzik taiva. Don't give yourself self-congratulation. That's your job. But Rav Chaim Volozhiner says another pshat in the translation. Al tachzik taiva liyatzmecha, quite literally, do not hold in the good thing for yourself. Share it. Pass it on. Ki lechach notzarta, you were created to give. See, a different emphasis. You weren't just created to learn, you were created to give. Right? So that fits exactly. That pshat in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos fits exactly what Rav Yitzchak Volozhiner says in the Akdama to Nefesh HaChaim, that was Rav Chaim's overall teaching. The Adam was not nivra for himself, he was nivra to give. Now again, I want to emphasize, that doesn't mean necessarily that the only avenue you have in life is to become a Rebbe or a Rosh Yeshiva or a Rav. Giving is many, many different ways. You give as a parent. You give, even if you're in a professional life, you give by giving a share or having chavrusas that you give. So I don't mean to say in the path of giving that I mean a specific thing. That's a separate discussion that every person has to have. But overall, you have to factor into your life the notion that I have to give. I have to be somebody who gives. It's not just about my taking. This is why they say the Dead Sea. This is a drush on an English term. In Hebrew, the Dead Sea is called Yam HaMelech, the Salt Sea. But in English, we call it the Dead Sea because no life can live in the Dead Sea because of the mineral content. But they say because in the Dead Sea, water flows in, but nothing flows out. That's called being dead. If you're not sharing your resources with others, that's like spiritually dead, right? So that which takes and doesn't give is called a mace. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to reconcile if giving is what's important. Why does it matter how we give if it's through a mitzvah of learning Torah, or if it's through a direct mitzvah? Is there a tangible difference? It's like hard to reconcile sometimes because it seems far removed with learning.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. So that goes back to what I started off with, that the Torah your learning is also a form of giving in the sense of bracha, and you should have that in mind as well, that you're learning to bring bracha into the world. And the difference would be, just like there's a difference between giving somebody a piece of gum and giving them a car. I mean, there are different levels in the magnitude of what you're giving. So Torah is a much more precious gift that you're giving. But we'll see. The Ramak is very interesting that he's going to give us different aspects. So the first aspect of Chochmah is, just as Hashem's Chochmah is Perusa ala kol, your Chochmah should be Perusa ala kol. You should be willing to share. Now, it's interesting, it just, again, Rav Moshe Feinstein said many, many years ago that the same way there's a mitzvah to give meiser on money, right? You earn money, so you give 10% of your money to tzedakah. So he said, this is kind of his chiddush really, there's no like earlier makar for this, there's a chiyuv on a ben Torah. Now again, we'll see, it may not necessarily be at your beginning stages, but eventually there's a chiyuv to at least give meiser on zman. That 10% of your time should be devoted to helping others in their Torah and the like. And even if you think I could learn more by myself, I could do more advanced by myself, there's the idea of meiser bisman. And the same way, Rav Moshe says, that the Torah says if you give meiser, Hashem blesses you with ashiras. So the meiser on zaman, you'll achieve more in your learning in the less time than you would achieve otherwise. In fact, the Stipler said it by chesed generally. It's very interesting. When people go to the Stipler and they would say, my wife wants me to do this and that and that and that, and I'm not learning as much as I did before I was married. So the Stipler said that when a person emulates the midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then he has more siyata d'shmaya in everything. So he says, if you spend 3 hours helping your wife, he says you will accomplish more in the remaining hours than you would have accomplished in the extra 3 hours not helping your wife. So you're not going to lose. You'll have less time, but you'll accomplish more. And I think we've all experienced this, that sometimes an hour can be extremely productive. And sometimes, as we say in Yiddish, es geht nicht, it wasn't going so well. And that's all a function of siyata d'shmaya. And the Stipler says, Hashem will give you this ability to accomplish in less time what would take more time. And Rav Moshe was talking about meiser in zaman of being mezakeh as a rabbi. And I read again, every story about Rav Moshe is sweet. Our school should give me a commercial because I always recommend the Rav Moshe biography and the Rav David Feinstein biography as two biographies you should read. And they say Rav Moshe was sitting in MTJ, Mesivta Tiferes Yerushalayim, which was his yeshiva. He was writing, as he always was writing. And when they came in for Ma'ariv, they noticed he was sitting with a 6th grade kid going over some chumash sheets. And they were kind of shocked, like, what's going on? So he says, this was a local kid of the neighborhood. He wandered in from Ma'ariv. He had to do his homework. And whatever it was. So Rav Moshe was the only one sitting there. So he said, can you help me with my homework? And Rav Moshe said, yeah, sure, let's go over it. So they went over chumash sheets for an hour. Somebody said to Rav Moshe, isn't this, it's a chaval that the Rosh Yeshiva, had to spend his time with this. We could have gotten a guy, a student in yeshiva. So Rav Moshe says, what's going? He says, this is my tafkid in life. My tafkid in life is to teach Torah. He says, what's the difference if it's to an advanced shiur or to a 6th grader? He says, this is nothing to apologize for, and this is my chiyuv. Al tachzik taiva liyatzmacha ki lekach netzart. Again, just so a beautiful thing. It was like, Rashi didn't even, it's not like, I'm such a tzaddik, I'm going to learn with a 6th grader. Rav Moshe had no self-consciousness about it. It was just, sure, this is what you do. Why not? Why shouldn't I do it? That's just beautiful thing. Those are the things, you got to internalize, you got to remember, because this is a yid, this is a yid. Not gadol, he happened to be a gadol, but this is the way a person is supposed to be. Like, people say, how do you become a gadol? Sometimes you become a gadol by being a person, by being a yid. Okay. So that's the first thing of Chochmah. Chochmah is perusa ala kol. But then he brings in an opposite idea that's very fascinating. He says Chochmah has two faces, an upper face and a lower face. The upper face is makabel from keser, and the lower face is mashpia on the lower levels, bina and the other spheros. So he says, this is very fascinating. He says, in spite of what I just said, that Chochmah is to share with everybody, see, he balances it out. A person has to have private time to absorb their Chochmah, to learn, to grow. In other words, you can't just be giving 100% of the time, because when are you going to learn? When are you going to grow? When are you going to get the knowledge that you need? He says, the same way that there are two aspects of Chochmah. One is receiving from Hashem, and then passing it on. You got to receive in order to pass on. Now, this, in reality, may be a bit of a theoretical machlokas in the Kiruv world. Let's say Chabad, Yeshivat Torah. Again, I don't want to get into, be guilty of assigning any particular shame. But there is a shita sometimes with the idea, if you know the Aleph base, you should immediately be teaching other people the Aleph base. In other words, whatever you know, immediately teach. Now, in the mainstream yeshiva world, that's not necessarily the approach always. Because sometimes there's an approach that before you're able to really teach, you need to build up your Torah knowledge. Because if you spend all of your time teaching others, then you're going to remain, although we do learn from Talmidim as well, but you're going to remain at a lower level, and you'll never build up your reserves. And the mashal that Rav Aaron Kotler gave, I think other people gave it before him, was that you need to be like an overflowing Kiddush cup. So imagine you have a big Kiddush cup, and it's surrounded with smaller cups. So I pour wine in the big cup till it overflows and then fills up the little cup. They even have devices made that way. So what's the mashal? You fill yourself up with Torah and then it overflows, as opposed to having a little bit of Torah that I immediately have to share. So the Ramak is giving an interesting perspective here. In spite of the importance of giving, a person has to take time to grow in their own learning and not stagnate. First of all, even psychologically, this is important, because otherwise this is what is called burnout. If a person does not feel they're actively growing, then they lose their enthusiasm for what they're doing. And then, not only are they not growing, they're also not giving, because there's nothing in them to be able to give. There's an expression in Yoredeya, it's nothing to do with this, but it's taken, it's a borrowed expression. The Gemara talks about, and it's in Shulchan Aruch too, talks about liver, right? A liver has a tremendous amount of blood in it, and that's why salting a liver doesn't help. Salting meat draws out blood, but the liver has so much blood that the only thing you can do with the liver, to kosher liver, is you have to broil it over a flame. Meaning, unlike chicken or regular meat that you salt, and the salt draws out the blood, liver requires saliyah. However, the Gemara says you can roast one piece of liver on top of another piece of liver, even though l'chayra, the fire draws out the blood of one piece and it's going to fall on the other piece. So how can I do that? Aren't I making the other piece of liver treif by absorbing the blood? So the Gemara says liver does not absorb blood from another piece of liver, because aidi detridi lemiflet, there is so much blood that it's giving out lo bala, it does not absorb new blood. Right? That's the halachic heter of roasting one piece of liver over another piece of liver, because the liver is giving out so much it's not able to absorb. Right? So that's a Yoridea halacha. But some kind of homiletically apply it this way. If you're so busy giving out Torah, lo bala, you don't absorb any Torah. Right? So the Ramak is actually highlighting the importance of what you might call private time. Private time. Time where you focus on your learning, on your aliyah. And I can tell you, professionally, this is a major problem for rabbis, shul rabbis, for kiruv workers, even for Rosh Yeshivas to some degree. And that is, a person is so busy teaching. When are they going to learn? Right? When are they going to learn? So the Ramak is highlighting a very important point, that Chochmah has these two faces. And therefore, you've got to make time for your learning. In fact, I tell people, one of our programs here is Orola, right? Orola prepares people who are going to go into Rabbanos or Kiruv or Chinuch and the like, that one of the great nisyonos is you'll be teaching, which is wonderful, but you got to make time for your learning, and it has to be something that goes beyond the sheer that you have to prepare. In other words, you should pick something that specifically has nothing to do with your teaching. It's your learning. And then, that'll give you siyata d'shmaya and enthusiasm and the like. Because otherwise, it's ID to treat it lemifla. Because again, to be honest, maybe I'm giving away a trade secret, which I shouldn't do. I mean, listen, when you're, let's take a Gemara share, right? Okay, Baruch Hashem, the center, you're already more advanced, so this doesn't apply to you. But let's talk about Mechina. I shouldn't say, they're just beginners, right? So to be frank, I'm preparing a share for beginners who are intelligent, but they don't have a lot of knowledge. So I can get away with very little. Do Gemara and Rashi, I can look at the R scroll too, secretly, and just go over it very superficially. I don't need to look at the Ramban, and I don't even have to look at Tosfos, because it's not going to come up. So you can get by because you can be like a little ahead of your student, right? And that doesn't take too much. I can be a little more. I know a little more than you. That's great, but you're doing yourself a disservice because you don't really go into the oimik of the sugya. Now, you're also doing the student a disservice, because if you understand the sugya be'in, there's all sorts of things, even in Pashut Pshat, that you can communicate that otherwise wouldn't be communicated. You see? So in reality, when a person is preparing a Gemara shir for a beginner, even if all they're going to do is Gemara and Rashi, is they should learn the Tosfos, Rishonim, Achronim, right? Much more than what they're going to teach. Right? They're not going to teach any of that. But they kind of need to know that to be able to do the Pashut Pshat, right? And that requires that you have time for yourself. You're not just, what do they say? You're not just learning for the test, right? You're not just preparing for the shir. You're preparing to understand this area of Torah, right? So this is a very, very interesting idea, therefore, that the Chochmah has two faces. There's the face that's makabel, and there's the face that gives, and you need both of them. And then he goes on and makes the point that, this is the point I made before, but he says it explicitly here, that the giving has to be according to the koach of the recipient. So the Rebbe might have to learn the Rebbe Kiva Eger, but that may not be the right thing for the student at that particular time. Right? So the Rebbe has to make a cheshbon, what is right for the person at this given time. And that's a chochmah, right? That is a chochmah. Kind of, what idea do you bring out? What idea don't you bring out? Now again, I will admit, it's important not to underestimate people. Because obviously, just because a person is a beginner doesn't mean he's stupid. He might be extremely smart. He might be smarter than the Rebbe. We're not talking about lack of intelligence. So it's important not to underestimate. Baruch Hashem, we're not dealing with unintelligent people. But still, there may be ideas at a certain level of Talmudic inexperience that are not yet ready to come out. So the Ramak says, part of being a giver is to know what to hold back at various times. So you have to You have to internalize it, but then you have to know what to say, what not to say. Okay? All right. So those are some aspects of Chochmah. So far we mentioned two. The Chochmah is available to everybody, but the Chochmah is also mistakel lamala, to absorb ruchnius and absorb HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now it's interesting, I'm just thinking, Rav Chanan Wasserman was a great Rosh Yeshiva. He was the Rosh Yeshiva Baranovich, one of the great yeshivas in Europe. And yet, as long as the Chavetz Chaim, Rav Chanan died in the Holocaust, but as long as the Chavetz Chaim was alive, the Chavetz Chaim died in 1933, the very beginning of Hitler's rise to power. Rav Chanan used to spend Elul through Yom Kippur in Radin. He would go to the Chavetz Chaim. Now it's a little odd because certainly in the European yeshivas, Elul was the time when the Rosh Yeshiva was most connected to his yeshiva, to be a mashpia, to be ma'arer people. So it's kind of odd for a Rosh Yeshiva to leave his yeshiva for the critical times of Elul and Yomim Naran. In other words, he did not spend Yomim Naran with his own yeshiva. He spent it with the Chavetz Chaim. What's going on? The answer is exactly this. Rabbi Chanan felt that in spite of his godless, he needed the chizuk of being with the Rosh Yeshiva, with the Chavetz Chaim, in order to be able to serve his Talmidim the rest of the year. So he took time off for his spiritual aliyah, even though it was maybe to the short-term detriment of the Talmidim that didn't have him, because ultimately Rabbi Chanan needed that to be able to give to the Talmidim. So that actually shows you that taking time for yourself is sometimes the way you help other people. In fact, I'll tell you a story not connected to Torah about this. Now, some people get shocked. Some people absolutely hate this story, but I'll tell the story because I think it makes a point. It's describing Yerushalayim in the 19th century was so poor. People had such aniyas. People would die in the street of starvation. In fact, the whole Heter Mechira of Rav Kook, selling land to Goyim, was because of the life-threatening nature. If you couldn't farm the land on Shemitah, it would even be worse. That's why many people say, if Rav Kook would be alive today, he would not matter Mechira to Goyim. It was a special situation of Pikuach Nefesh. So they say that the story about a woman with 8 children, she was an almana. And somehow, miraculously, she got one egg, one hard-boiled egg. So she's debating, what do I do? Do I divide it in 8 pieces? What do I do with one hard-boiled egg? So the story goes, she went into the bedroom, she closed the door, and she ate the egg herself. So people hear that story. Some people get really, really angry. Oh, what type of mother is that? But this was her cheshbon. Her cheshbon is, let's assume I give each child an eighth of an egg. How long is that going to satisfy them? How is it going to help them? So each child will feel good for 5 minutes. If I have koach and I take care of me, I will be able to give my children chizuk for the whole day. One egg. It's not like she was eating steak. One egg. I will have chizuk for the whole day, and maybe I'll find other food, or I'll give them chizuk and encouragement. So this is a very interesting calculation. Sometimes you got to be selfish in order to truly help somebody. Got to take care of yourself. Now, obviously, one has to be careful that doesn't turn into narcissism and the like. But there is a notion. This is the cheshbon that this tzedek is made. It's better for her to eat a whole egg than to divide the egg among 8 children. And when I say better for her, I don't mean better for her. Better for her children that she should eat the whole egg. Interesting cheshbon. And I think I'm connecting it to Rav Chanan going to the Chavetz Chaim for the whole Elul Zman, that he needed to kind of focus on his spiritual growth to be able to give to his Talmidim. By the way, Rav Chanan was very connected to Chavetz Chaim, ad kedei kach, that there were other people who would come to Radin for Yomim Naran. And the Chavetz Chaim gave a drasha, and somebody remarked to Rav Chanan, the Chavetz Chaim said the same thing last year. And Rabbi Chanan said, no, he added 6 words. So that's how attuned Rabbi Chanan was to every nuance of the Chafetz Chaim. Okay, stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.